Okay, so we're getting started here, and welcome everybody to the Composer Symposium. This is going to be slightly different. Everybody will be joining in and watching. You'll be able to ask questions by typing in the live chat. However, it's probably just going to be me video-wise. I don't think anybody else can pipe in with their video like it's a Google Hangout. Marios, I see you. Hello. So we'll go ahead and wait for a few more people to join. And yeah. So give me just a minute as people start to join. I'll jump into everything. Just a minute. Okay. Hi, Sebastian. Welcome. So the way these symposiums work, this is just something I like to do. I like to get on with my students every week from the Art of Composing Academy and have them ask questions. They can chat with me. We can talk about their compositions. Ilka, I see you. I do want to know if you're enjoying this format as opposed to the Google Hangouts. Normally, it's a little bit different because I'm chatting directly with you. You guys turn on your mics and everything, and this is basically just going to be me talking. So it's important that you use the chat feature. You submit your questions. There's no particular topic for today. I was just going to open it up to questions. So, oh, good. Ilka says it works on a tablet with a train. So, hello, Matthias. I see everybody there. So I've had a slow week for composing. We've just got a lot of stuff going on. My kids are just getting over being sick. So sadly, I haven't done as much sketching as I wanted to this week. But that is life. So yeah, we've got about 16 people watching right now. I see Kia is asking about Schenkerian topics. So I don't really do much Schenkerian analysis. I understand the concept, and for anybody who's not familiar with Schenkerian analysis, Schenker was a German theorist that lived kind of near the turn of the century. I'm not sure the exact dates of his life. I suppose I could look that up right now. But he had this idea that there was this underlying structure and kind of melodic line and kind of underlying bass line to all great masterworks, really tonal masterworks. And Schenkerian analysis will try to show you where the structural notes in a piece are melodically and as well as the bass line. And everything else kind of falls within that as, I don't know all the terminologies. Like I said, I'm not an expert on Schenkerian analysis. I find that it's not all that useful for composers. It may be great for analysis, but for a composer, I find it just not very intuitive to be able to use those topics or those analyses after the fact for your own composing. So, but yeah, effectively, you'll take a line that is, well, in fact, here, let me show you a kind of a concept here, and let me zoom in a little bit, and let me know if you hear the music, because I want to make sure. If you've got a melody, right, it comes back a little bit to the way I like to teach melodies, chord tone melodies, but it's slightly different because it's a little more long term. He'll say that the underlying structure of a melody may be 3, 2, 1, and then the underlying bass would be 1, 5, 1. And then in between that, you've got all these, I don't know what the proper term is, but like these non-structural notes that are embellishments of this overall structure. And he tries to boil down pieces a lot of times to something like this. So like I said, this is a kind of a gross simplification of Schenkerian analysis. Obviously, there's a lot of people who devote a lot of time and a lot of effort into doing these analyses, and I just found that every time I've tried to dive into it, ultimately I don't walk away with something that I can really use, because as a composer, often we are very concerned with the surface features. Um, so, and this is underlying structure, which obviously we're concerned with underlying structure as well, but I find surface features to be equally as important, and I think Schenkerian analysis doesn't put that equal weight on them. So, Matthias, I can see that you're saying that the music sounds better. That's good. That's good to know. I want to be able to give you a good quality product here. So let's go ahead and have some questions. Please post your questions in the live chat feature, and I will try to answer them as quickly as I can. Let's see. I'll go ahead and clear that music from Sibelius. In particular, questions about sketching or orchestration are good, because those are really on my mind right now. That's where most of my personal research is going, and I would like to develop my ideas a little bit further. So if you have questions about orchestration or about sketching in particular, let's go ahead and dive into those. What I've been working on recently is really trying to figure out a way that we can conceptualize orchestration and look at orchestration in a way that is related to how we actually hear. So it's using this concept of auditory streams and auditory scene analysis. And if you've never heard of that and you're a composer, I would recommend starting to Google around, check out the Wikipedia page on auditory scene analysis and auditory streams, because as a concept for a composer, it's extremely useful. So the concept of an auditory stream is that let me back up. Auditory scene analysis. Your brain, when you're walking around, is picking up all the sounds around you. It could be picking up the sound of a crowd. It could be picking up the sound of a conversation, or your baby crying, or the sound of a piano. The way your brain sections those things and interprets them is called auditory scene analysis. And you break up different sounds into what are called auditory streams. Now, a stream is a single line of sound that your brain perceives as one single continuous, object or one continuous, stream. Stream's the best way to explain it. So let's say, for instance, you're at a cocktail party and you can hear the entire crowd speaking. You hear this kind of like the chatter and the clinking of the cups and everything. But for some reason, you're able to also hear the person that's speaking to you directly. Hey, Michael, I see you there, and I see everybody else's questions. I'm going to try to get to the sketching question in a second. Let me just finish my little explanation of auditory streams. So the way your brain interprets and picks up those auditory streams is based on a lot of factors. So it could be based off of the timbre, right? Somebody's voice has a unique timbre, and when you're listening to somebody speak, your brain can continuously pull out that timbre and separate it from the background noise. It could also be the general pitch area. So if you've got two instruments that are kind of playing in the same general, maybe they're playing chords together, same general area, the same rhythms, those are going to be brought into auditory streams. And what's interesting about it, and why I'm really thinking about it for orchestration, is that you can only really perceive 3 auditory streams at the same time. Anything after that, you still hear, right? You still hear all the background noise. You hear the general crowd, but it becomes effectively incoherent. so you are unable to perceive it as an individual stream. It just floats into the background. That is extremely useful for an orchestrator, because what it means is that at max, you can only have 3 individual streams at one time that anybody can coherently perceive. You can have more streams than that, but it starts to muddy things up, or it falls into general background noise. Now, that may be useful as an orchestrator. Maybe you want to obscure a little bit the sound and the timbre of the instrument, so maybe you want that background noise. However, it's just a very useful way of thinking about things. And my research right now is really about coming up with a theory and a full system of orchestration based off of this. So let me go ahead and jump back up here. I see we've got some questions. Anil said, can you talk a little bit about atonal music and your perception on it? Well, okay, so let's talk about kind of the levels of atonality. So we've got tonality, right? We know everybody's familiar with tonal harmony. If you've grown up anywhere in the Western world, and pretty much probably anywhere now, you've heard some kind of tonal music. Well, atonality is trying to obscure that tonal center, right? So if you do something like this, then you know that everything's leading back to this one note. This is C, by the way. Right? Now, there's levels of obscuring that tonality. You could do something like move outside of the key area. And then now, where we could go, well, if I go back to C, it still feels right in terms of, I've been playing C quite a bit, right? We haven't gone full atonal yet, but we are not using fully functional harmony. These are called chromatic mediant relationships. They're related by minor or major thirds, and they're not within the key of C. Now, why that's important is because I can start to obscure your connection to C, and this is bringing us away in the spectrum of tonality. So if I do that, right, coming back to C feels right. But now I went to A, and I'm obscuring where is home base at this point. Right? Now, it's not fully obscured because I went back to functional harmony, and that's the power of functional harmony, is you can get away from tonality, and you can come back to tonality really quite quickly by throwing in something like a 5-1, right? E to A. But I can just as easily obscure it by going to something else that is a chromatic mediant relationship away from E, which could be G. Now, we're all used to hearing these chromatic mediant relationships because it's used all the time in film scoring. It's just a cool sound, so we use it a lot. Now, to get even further away, and it's kind of hard to improvise this stuff on the spot, but atonality is not the same necessarily as serialism, which is kind of the extreme aspect of atonality, where you take a tone row, right, and you play notes off of that tone row in that order. So, I have to, let's see if I can generate a tone row real quick. Generator, let's see. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have let's see. Give me a second here. Apologize. I want to make sure. Maybe I can generate something really fast. Let's see. Okay. Just click in random notes. Okay. So now let's talk about what a tone row is. A tone row uses all 12 notes or all 11 notes, I guess, with the 12th one being the same. All the notes of the chromatic scale, right? So here we've got one where it's G, E flat, C, G flat, A flat, B flat, B, A, D flat, D, E, F, and then we're back on G. And while sometimes you may get the feeling of tonality based on the order of those tone rows, then it's an illusion in terms of that's just kind of happenstance. So if I were to go, the first three notes here are G, E flat, C, which makes it sound like we're on a C minor chord. But then the next note, G flat, obviously not part of that. And I find it's actually kind of fun to improvise off of these tone rows in a way I personally like to compose tonally, and I like to make it a challenge to see if I can use a tone row to compose tonally a little bit. So maybe I do something like this. This is G, E, or E flat, C. Those are the next three notes on the tone row. And then we're back at G. So right there, I'm just going on one single row and I am improvising based off of it. Now, the cool thing about tone rows is that you can, and in fact, hold on, let me try to share my screen real quick so that you can see what I'm doing. You can look at the tone row. You're not just looking at my face. Let's see. Not display capture. Let's do browser. And no, that's wrong. I think it's got to be window capture. Apologies for this. There we go. Okay. So hopefully you can see this. And so yeah, here we go. Let me make this a little bit bigger too. So we've got this row right here. This first row that I went on was the G, E flat, C, G flat, A flat, E flat, B, A, D flat, D, E, F. Now you've got all these different versions of it where you're starting on different notes. And what these are is these are either inversions or retrograde inversions, right? So you've got basically all directions, and that's why it's a matrix. And you can start on any of these. So if we start on G, E flat, C, and we go through this row, maybe then I can continue doing this, right? But then I can move to a different row. So I'll move to the second row here. And then I'll keep going. So what I did is I played a chord with these three, and then I went up here. It's just fun. It's a way to get out of your own brain and your own technical skills and try to make something slightly different. Now, I do like to try to balance this against the ability, the traditional abilities of composition, understanding functional harmony, understanding how melody works, how form works, and I find it a valuable tool, but it's not the end-all, be-all of composition. And personally, I don't listen to a lot of music that's purely atonal or purely serialistic music, because I find it loses a little bit of the humanity, the human connection. So hopefully that answers a little bit about your questions with atonal music and serialism. It's not my expertise. Serialism and atonality is not really my expertise. But I do know enough about it to be able to use it. There's a lot of other techniques that come along with it, and there's some good books. I'll see if I can post one a little bit later in the notes for this. So let's move on to a different question here. Let's see. Sebastian is asking, sketching means drawing music before actually having scored it, right? So let me talk about sketching and in the way I like to perceive it. Sketching is anything that is actually writing down notes for me, or writing down structural information about the piece. It doesn't necessarily mean drawing music or it doesn't. It's one of these fuzzy terms that could be, you could be sketching while you're structurally mapping out your piece too. You can bounce back and forth. But the core for me is sketching is really about getting information down on paper as a mnemonic device. So if you think about when you're actually in the moment of composition, you have ideas that are being possibly improvised, right? Maybe you just come up with something like this. And that's really nice. I really like the sound of it. But you have to have some way of remembering this. Now, we've got a lot of ways of doing this. I could just write the notes down as they are, and obviously that's always perfectly acceptable. You can always go into exact detail with what you're writing, but you don't necessarily have to do that every time. So what I played, and this is also an important skill for composers, is called audiation. It's the ability to hear something and understand it in your brain, or to read music and be able to hear that in your brain. And while that sounds like something that would be very difficult, it does happen with practice. And the best way to do that is to compose and write by hand, or to read scores and try to imagine, or to read scores while listening to other things. But I could now, this is kind of what I played. It was something like this. I was able to play that, improvise it, and write it down. However, that is the vital step. Everything else that I did, the ability to audiate, the ability to improvise, is secondary to the fact that you need to start writing down your music. Otherwise, you're going to go, this is what I call the problem of noodling. You're going to go 5 minutes, you're like, ooh, I like that. And then maybe you go up here. Ooh, I like that. Yeah, that was good. So that all sounded great, and maybe I do that for another 30 seconds and I move on to some other key area. And then after about 30 seconds to a minute, I look back and all I have written down is this. And I don't remember what I played next. See, that's the problem, is a lot of people don't take that next step and actually just sitting down and writing it out. So one of the critical aspects to sketching, and don't fool yourself to think that if you take the time to write it out, you're not going to get that flow and that state, is every time you come up with an idea, you stop and then you write that down. Dun, dun, right? And then maybe over here, my next idea was... And I think that may have actually been slightly different from what I played earlier, which is a great example of how you have to get this stuff down in the moment. But then I'll start to write this down. And then I know the rhythm is the same here, and it was up here. Now, I've got working habits with Sibelius. Obviously, if you're writing by hand, you can't just copy and paste. So now we've got two measures here. So maybe there I play it again. But you can see every time I come up with an idea, I'm writing it down. The beauty of sketching is nothing is set in stone, and I can erase it, I can cross it out. The danger of notation software is that it is very precise. It's very accurate in terms of this is reality, this is what you've written down, and when you press play, it's going to play it back exactly. The beauty of writing things down by hand, which is something that I like to do a lot, is that it's not so set in stone. You have to physically play what you've written down, and sometimes you mess it up, which leads to new ideas. Sometimes you're like, yeah, I'm just going to move, I'm going to scratch it out. You don't have to shift your music like you do in your notation software or your DAW. You don't have to, there's not a lot of cleanup involved. You just cross it out. So yeah. Now, other techniques that I like to use when I'm sketching is, one, how can I reduce the amount of information that I'm actually writing out? And one of the best ways is to understand what is the underlying harmony underneath and just writing something that gives you that idea. So here I would say I'm leaning towards A minor here. So I could do something like just put a Roman numeral and put a 6 there, right? I don't have to, obviously we're in C major, so 6 is going to be A minor. I've got an F sharp in the melody, but I don't need to say anything about that in the harmony. I can keep it clean. Another way I like to do it, obviously, is chord symbols. So I could put A minor right there and do that. If I like to clean it up, sometimes I put it in the middle of the staff just to keep space. And then also, I could just put an A, and I could understand, because this is a mnemonic device, this is for me, and that's one important thing, is your sketches are not for other people necessarily, they're for you. Now, there may be a situation where it is for another person. For instance, if you're a film composer and you've got a sketch and then hand that off to an orchestrator, you may have to approach this slightly different and give more information depending on how comfortable you are with that orchestrator. But in this situation, this is just for me. I can just put an A there, or I can put it as a whole note, and I know that I want to keep the same type of accompaniment figure, right? This. I can also know that I want to generally keep the same shape, right? This 1-5-1 kind of shape. Oh, you know what? I just realized we're in C major. F major. I'm playing kind of F major with this, even though the key signature is C major. Nonetheless, A minor is still part of F major, so it all works out. Now, so those are just some techniques. I guess it boils down to try to write down as little as information as possible to remember everything that you did. And that means if you have to write this out exactly, write it out exactly. If you don't have to write it out exactly, don't. Just do what you think you can remember. So let me go. Let's see, David, are you seeing the score? Is everybody seeing the score? If you could let me know in the chat, because let's see. Let me go ahead and check the chat here. I need to make sure that you can still hear my audio and video, because somebody put in here no audio or video, but that may be them. So let's see. Somebody's asking to display the keyboard at the bottom. Yeah, maybe I can do that. Hold on. Panels, keyboard. There we go. There's my keyboard. So now you can see that. Okay, so Juan asked, what's the subject of the webinar? Right now, the webinar is just kind of open to questions. I've talked a little bit about sketching and atonality. So Andres is asking if it's a good idea to practice sketching by hand. Absolutely. I've been doing a lot of research on this, and there's so many deep connections between your eyes, your hand, and your brain, and your ears that I think it's critical for anyone, and thanks everybody for letting me know, yes, okay. I think it's critical for anybody who wants to compose to at least practice sometimes composing by hand. There is something special, and there's been a lot of research, not so much research for composing, but a lot of research for typing versus writing when taking notes, that your brain remembers things much better if you write by hand, even when you don't refer to those notes. And I can back this up with a lot of experience from just going to school, going to college. I was always a hand note taker. I almost never took my laptop to class. And I usually tested well in things, even without a ton of study. And I believe it was because I took a lot of notes by hand, and I always listened in class. I listened intently. Often I didn't read the books, which I probably wasn't the greatest student in school. I was a history major, and I don't know. I just, for some reason, I started the semester. I was like, yeah, I'm going to do all my reading this semester. About 2 weeks later, I'm like, I'm just going to go play music stuff. So, but yeah, the connection between your hand, your eyes, your brain, listening to the music, writing it down, just getting that tactile feel of what things feel like, and if you can, playing it at the piano. I know there's a lot of guitarists often that will ask me, do I have to play piano for composing? Absolutely not. You do not need to know how to play. In fact, you don't really need to know how to play an instrument. You need to be able to read music. I think that's critical. Although there's cases of ear composers and a lot of jazz players that play purely by ear, never learn to read music. That is a handicap, and I believe that anybody who's serious about composition should, one, learn to read music, and then two, they should also learn to play the piano, even if it's at the most basic level. But, the ability to play harmonies in a really simple way, to change octaves, you don't get that as much on the guitar, and trying to do that in your notation software, it takes forever to write it out. And then on top of that, it becomes really difficult to do complex harmonies. If I wanted to do something like this, that's a polychord, right? Where I'm playing a C7 chord in the left hand and an F sharp major chord in the right hand. Yeah, there's some voicings for that on the guitar, but you're just not going to have the level of control that you do with a piano. And if you look at the history of great composers in the past, with very few exceptions, almost all of them could play piano, and very many of them could play piano really well. So, Bach, obviously, master at the organ and harpsichord and a little bit of the pianoforte. You've got guys like Mahler. Mahler he did a ton of performing as a younger man. As he moved into conducting, that became his main thing. He didn't play nearly as much, but he still obviously had the abilities. And when I read through his biography, there was a lot of times when he would play his symphonies for other people at the piano before he had a chance to orchestrate and to hear it back. There are some examples of mediocre piano players like Wagner. Wagner was supposed to be a mediocre piano player, but that's not a completely non-piano player. He's mediocre, and mediocre is all you need, because if Wagner was mediocre and the music he wrote is great, then you can be a mediocre piano player, and I can be mediocre, and we can compose great music. So yeah. Let me keep moving down here. Let me see. So Bun Catbo ask, how do you practice sketching by hand? I hear music and have to hear it while writing, so I know it's right, but then I lose all the other instruments when I have an orchestral piece or I use maybe all the other instruments when I have an orchestral piece in my head. So practicing sketching by hand doesn't have to be scary. And what I would recommend is, if you've never done it, then do it really simply first. So let's go ahead and erase what I've written right here. And let's just try to imagine that this is your first time sketching by hand. And we are sitting at a piano, and we are going to try to write something that is very basic, not to overwhelm ourselves. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to try to do this simultaneously. So I'm going to write a little bit by hand so you can see what I'm doing, and then maybe I'll transfer it into Sibelius so it doesn't seem boring just looking at things. Let's see. Another rule of sketching in music papers: have a lot of music paper at home. Don't just have one book, because then you get all like weird about using up all the pages. Sometimes I just like to look at a blank page versus looking at a page that has some music that I've already sketched. This gives me the ability to add to this in the future, and it gives me a clean slate for doing a new idea, so I don't feel like the other one is clouded by the other idea. So that's just something. I've got tons of music books around. Here's another pretty much empty one. I've got, I think, like 2 or 3 spread around. I've got a little one that I like to carry around with me. This is the see, it's I don't know if you can see. There we go. These are the moleskin little music books. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, okay, I'm going to start off. I like to set constraints. So I'm going to say, once again, just for simplicity's sake, we're going to be writing in C major in 4/4, right? So I've set that now as a constraint on my page. And let's just start basic. I'm going to start with a melody that starts on C. And I can play something. Now, all I've done, and I don't have to figure out all of it all at once, I just played an idea. And I know that those are basically either quarter notes, with the last one being 2 beats, or maybe they're half notes. And it's a little bit faster. Either way, I'm going to just write what I know. I mean, I know I'm playing a C up here, right? So I can write a C. I know I'm playing a D after that, so I can write a D. And then I know I'm playing another C, so I can write another C. I don't have to know the rhythm. And if you see here, let me get the Sibelius away for a second. If you see here, all I've written is pitches. I haven't written any other information. I colored them in, but you know, maybe I can change that later to be, if the other one's a half note, erase it and just, you know, circle it in. But now what I can do is I can sing it what I did, right? I'm connecting this with my body. I'm connecting it with my throat. Often, actually, there has been studies on audiation, the ability to hear and perceive and understand music in your head. And what they found is that often people their throats will move up and down like they're actually singing, even though no air is coming through. So there is a very strong connection between understanding the music in your brain and how your body actually feels when you're doing that music. If you've played in a like say a wind band, or you know, let's say you played an orchestra growing up as a kid, you'll probably notice, this is something I've always done pretty much my whole life since I started playing trumpet. When I read music, let's say it's C, D, E, my fingers will actually move. C, D, E, right? Open 1 and 3, 1 and 2 for trumpet. And I can actually go through a lot of music really quickly and understand what's going on by going da 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 da, right? My fingers just want to play it. It's like I can't even control it sometimes. And the same with singing. Da, da, da. Right? When I'm thinking about that in my head, I'm not making any noise, but my throat is physically moving. So I'll see if I can find that research paper and post a link to it as well. I read that a long time ago, so I don't know necessarily where it is. But let me get back to sketching. So what I'm going to do is, because I know those are my notes, I'm going to figure out the rhythm. And don't be afraid to clap and maybe look a little bit ridiculous. Da, 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 da. Right? So I know 1 is 1 beat, 2 is 1 beat, and then 3 is 2 beats. So now I can come back here and I can just put lines and fix this last one to be a half note. And now I've sketched the first bar of my melody. Now sometimes it helps to not put in those things first. I mean, if I know that it's da da da, right? And this is why spacing, like understanding how notation works, you keep a little bit of space, and you don't necessarily need to, if things are relatively spaced, you don't necessarily need to write in all those lines to show you the exact length of it. So I could do da, 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 right? And I can come here and I can start to write in this. And now I'm starting to sketch out a second measure. And I'm not writing in the exact rhythms, but I know generally what I want. I've worked it out in the first measure. Now for the left hand, right, I could play a block chord. Something like that. I could write in the chord symbol if I don't know exactly how I want the accompaniment to be. Often, I'll know a little bit about what I want, just kind of what feels right. Right? So maybe I really like that sound, and I go ahead and I write that down. Let's see. Now, once again, I just wrote the pitches. I'm trying to move quickly here. And if you can understand what your rhythm is, then it's for you. This is not for anybody else. I don't personally feel like I need more than that. Maybe somebody else does. But let's say I want to add a little bit more detail. Let's see. Maybe I do something like that that's a little bit messy, right? Those are, it looks like 5/8 notes, but it's fine because I can just put a little line here to show that that kind of rings out. And then for the next one, right? So if I do this, sorry, my pencil fell. And then the next melody is, if I, let's say I wanted to do that on a 4-chord, right? I don't necessarily need to write out all those notes. I can just put F. And I know F is going to work there. Or I can put 4, something like that. And now I'm making quick progress here. And then maybe the next measure, I do this again. What I could do, and this is something I like to do, is I label general areas. So like this is what I would consider a basic idea. A basic idea comes from classical form, which is a 2-measure idea that prolongs tonic, is kind of the basic, the fundamental definition of it. But I can call this A, right? And I can call it A1 and A2. So A is those first 2 measures, and then 1 is 1 and 2 is 2. And then I can come in here and I can say A1. Where is that? A1. It looks like 4/1. And what I've done here is I've got shorthand that I want to repeat that measure exactly. And then over here, let's say I could change it up. You know, let's say I want to do something like that. Then I go over here, E flat, and then I do B flat, A flat, B flat. And now I'm making quick forward progress. Obviously not as quick as when I do it by myself, where I'm not having to explain everything all the time. But yeah, that's just a simple way to really begin practicing. I mean, I think it's critical that you just take the time. Also, trying to compose without the piano, just writing notes based off of relative pitch, and then going and playing it at the piano afterwards is a great way to secure this hand, eye, ear, brain connection. So let me go ahead and answer a few more questions here. And I'm sorry if I skip your question. The chat's coming along pretty fast pacer, so I want to make sure I get to some slightly different ones. Mario said, I've written a study, but in some parts it is too difficult to play. Should I make it a bit simpler? Yes. I mean, if you're the one that's wanting to be the player that actually plays it, then yeah, simplify it to the level that you can play, unless it's just outside of your grasp, and then get it up to standard. You know, I think there's benefit in learning to play your own music, and it's something that I personally haven't spent enough time doing, is memorizing my own pieces and getting to the point where if somebody asks, hey, play me something you wrote, that you could just sit down, knock it out at the piano, and everyone's like, wow, you're an amazing composer. So I think, yeah, simplify it if you have to, or practice it enough that you can get it down. So let's see. Okay, Andres asks, how do you suggest practicing orchestration? Well, orchestration, once again, is, I find that there is a lot of benefit in trying to do some things by hand. So a great way to get the sounds in your ear, obviously, listen to a lot of music, transcribe some music. You'll start to really feel the timbres and the changes. But the best way, I would say, well, there's the 2 best ways are take little pieces that you write, right? Even a small theme, and orchestrate that. And orchestrate it in a logical way. So I'm a big fan of understanding your own form, right? The form of your piece. And the reason is because orchestration often is used to illuminate the form. You'll hear that in a lot of orchestration manuals. And really what that means is that you're controlling you're controlling the intensity of the emotional state of the listener, right? You're controlling the moments where they get a little bit of repose. You're controlling the moments where it gets intense. They have a lot of reactions to it. There is research being done at McGill University where they're actually having people listen to orchestrations in different versions of the same piece orchestrated slightly different ways. And they're measuring their breathing rate. They're measuring their pulse. They're measuring, the skin. I don't know what the term is, but goosebumps, I guess. They're actually measuring how does your central nervous system respond to music in different kinds of orchestrations. And that's all great, but if you don't connect that with the structure and the reality of your music, it can be lost on you. So understanding the structure of your own pieces is critical. And if you go to my website, I've got tons of articles and videos and past symposiums where we talk about, classical form and how it all works. Because the way form works is really, it connects your music with time, with temporality. It allows you to control what feels like a beginning, a middle, and an ending. And that's critical to orchestration. So yeah, just keep things simple at first when you're practicing your orchestration. Keep instruments grouped. Try to keep those streams down to 3, right? I talked about that a little bit at the beginning, but these auditory streams, if you think about it, if you've got a piece and you want to orchestrate it, and you know that people can only really perceive 3 individual streams at a time, then that means you don't want to get too complex with your orchestration, especially at the beginning. If you look at an orchestrator like Mahler, yeah, there seems to be a lot going on, but one of the things I'm doing right now, let me see if I can find it, is, and yeah, my desk is really messy. I'm going through and I'm doing analysis of his orchestration just by hand right now. Excuse me. Sorry, I got to sneeze. Yeah, so I'm doing analysis, and what on the surface will always seem to be a lot of complexity really is most often just 3 individual streams. You can see this is the beginning to Symphony Number 4, and you can see here I've got a green stream, right? Now, even though they're separated on the score, the way your brain hears it is one single stream. And then you've got a second stream that comes in, and then a third stream right here, and it maxes out. Now, a little bit over here, you've got a little bit of overlap, right? That's where violins come in, and I'll pull up something to play this in a second. The violins come in, and they overlap with these 3, but these are dying away, and that one's coming up. So when you hear it, it's actually, it's kind of dovetailing, and you hear the 3 streams and the one blend in together, and then a second stream starts up after that, the blue, that's all pizzicato. And as you go further in the piece, let me see, it's weird to hold things up to the camera and try to like mirror image things. But almost always there's 2 streams. Here, where is it? There's 2 streams right there. There's a third one added. Even though it's complex on the surface, underneath, what your brain is actually perceiving is relatively simple. 2 streams, 3 streams at max, or 3 streams plus background noise, maybe to obscure some other stuff. I'm conceiving that as like masking frequencies. So let me go ahead and play that real quick. And this is risky because when I play stuff from iTunes, Mahler, or not Mahler, when I play stuff from here, it will, let's see, Mahler, Symphony 4. YouTube tags it as copyrighted stuff, and we'll put ads on my videos. So apologize if you see ads. Let's see, let me just pick one. So listen to that first stream. Let's see. So we've got flutes, blup, 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 and we've also got like a tambourine or something. No, actually, kind of sounds like sleigh bells. So, and then the other flute comes in, and it's playing da 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 da, and then the clarinet comes in, and they play kind of little counter melodies to each other. Let me play it again, and just listen for the 3 streams. Now there's two streams. It's the violin melody, and it's the pizzicato underneath. Okay, so that's two streams. Now the melody is going to be picked up by the low bass, or the basses and cellos, and it's going to be, actually violas are playing as well. And then you've got that, so that's one stream, and then you've got two streams, or another stream up top, which is the it's the harmony, harmonic support. And then a third stream comes in. Now, it dovetails with the other one, so really still we've only got two streams, but eventually it gets a little more complex. It's one very useful way of thinking about all this. So yeah, let me move on to another question here. Okay. Let's see. When writing a bass line, is it acceptable? Oh, no. Let me move back. Sorry, Charles. I got you all excited. No, that's right. Okay. When writing a bass line, is it accepted to have a bass line melody that is a bit slower against the faster melody? Yeah, I mean, right? That the melody was moving faster. Now, moving at different tempos. Yeah, that's done in a lot of 20th century music. I wouldn't necessarily recommend it for intelligibility, but you can do whatever you want. I mean, that's perfectly acceptable. So, but yeah, often the melody is faster than the bass line. It's just because the bass line is usually representing some underlying harmony, right? It's kind of the core note in that harmony. And the melody is playing lots of other things on top of it. It's you know. Something like that. Okay, so let's see. Here's another question by ISD Fable. Okay. This is my first symposium, and how did you learn all these musical ideas and shorthands, chords that work well together that you could just pull from your mind so quickly? Well, it's been a long process. I for the most part, I consider myself a self-taught composer. I did go through the UCLA Extension film scoring program, but it was less about actual composition techniques and more about film scoring techniques, getting your music syncing up, understanding, understanding how your music works to picture. So I generally consider myself a self-taught composer. I've read a lot of books, and some of these techniques, especially on sketching, I'm really working out on my own. There's no guide to sketching. There's a book on sketching. There's some books on sketch studies and studying other composer sketches. But I've been looking at a lot of composer sketches and just trying to pull out what are the useful techniques that they have. And there's a lot of them. There's a lot of little shorthands that people use. Now, in terms of understanding how harmony works and melody works, it's through study, time, practice, experience, listening to a lot of music. It's just the amount of time that you put in. Now, obviously, there are rules. There's syntax to harmony. We call it functional harmony, and it's a way for us to understand kind of the forward momentum of harmony. It always feels like traditional classical harmony is going somewhere, and that's because it is usually headed towards this one tonic note. So functional harmony in a nutshell is 1, 6, 4. Oh, sorry, that was a 2 chord. 4, 2, or actually I should do 7, 5, 1. And that order is the general order of chord syntax. That's normally if you're on a 1 chord, you can go to any one of those chords, but as you keep going right, and I've got a chord chart, and if you sign up for my free course, or if you check out some of my articles on harmony, you'll see my chord charts on the site that explain how to use these harmonies. I am working on a new chord chart, which is not ready for prime time yet, but I'll give you a small glimpse of it. And give me 1 second. So there you go. Oh, that's all you get to see. No, it's effectively what this chart is, and I apologize because this is a very ugly version of it. And And it also may be kind of small. Hold on, let me... no, that's not really that much bigger. Let me try to make this a little bit bigger. There we go. Center that. So what this chord chart tells us is effectively all sorts of directions that we can go with things. And I'm trying to add a whole lot of other stuff that wasn't in my original chord chart. But as you can see here, you've got a 1 chord, right? That can move to a 6 chord. That can move to a 4 chord. That can move to a 2 chord, which can go to a 7 chord, and it can go to a 5 chord, and then back to 1. That goes back to 1 on this arrow. Now the rule is you can move from left to right, basically always. So I can go from 1 to any chord to its right. So I don't have to go to 6. I can go 1, 4, and then from 4 I don't have to go to 2 or 7. I can just go to 5, and then 1. And I can do that with any of these chords. Now I can also move to any of these little chords that are connecting my way along here. So let's say I'm on a 1 chord and I want to move to a 5 of 6, which in this case is an E7, right? Which takes us to A minor. But I can also go to now a 5 of 4. I can move from left to right. And then to 4. And then I can go to 5 of 2. Right? It starts to add a lot of interest. And then I don't have to go straight to 5, right? I can go from the 2 chord to a 5-6-4, which 5-6-4 confuses a lot of people because the notes are actually G, C, E, and it's because it's called a cadential 6-4. So if I go from 2 to a cadential 6-4, and then to a 5, now along this arrow I can go back to another chord. This is a deceptive cadence, right? You hear that a lot. And then from here, I could go all sorts of places. Now, if I wanted to say modulate to 2, right? These are my pivot chords. I can, if I find myself on one of these pivot chords, so if I go 1, 5 of 6, 6, 5 of 4. Now, let's say I want to pivot to 2. I'm on a 4 chord, and all I have to do is play that 5 of 2. And now I'm in the key of 2, right? D minor in this case. And having this stuff built into your brain, right? Practicing it enough that you understand how this works and you've actually internalized it a little bit. That's what gives me the ability to sit down and then improvise, not just grabbing for things around, not just saying, you know, ooh, that sounds really good, but I don't understand any bit about how that works. Well, I've got this knowledge now built in because I've done enough, and I can say, that sounds really good because that's a Lydian sound, right? It's that sharp 4 sound. And you hear this. You hear that sound all the time. I know that, I've internalized it, I've used it enough to where I can pull it out when I need it, or sometimes it comes out naturally in the process of improvising. So, okay, let's see. Let me go ahead and move on. Let's see. While orchestrating, how do you go about doubling the notes and voicing? So, doubling is a critical skill that you need to get your head wrapped around, and you've got doubling in the sense of part writing, and then you also have doubling in the sense of controlling the timbre or controlling how strong a note is in the texture. And they're 2 different things, but they are related. So in part writing, you've got rules of doubling. You know, most often you double the root, and you try to avoid doubling the third. You can have a complete chord with a tripled root, and leave out the 5th, right? Right, that's a complete chord. You got 1, 5, 3, and 1 here. But I could just as easily leave out the 5 and triple the root, and it still sounds like a complete chord. Whereas if I leave out the 3, it's ambiguous. It could be major, could be minor, depending on the context. That's not all there is to part writing and doubling. But that's one aspect of it. Now, the other aspect with orchestration really has to do with, how loud you need the note, what kind of timbre or nuance do you want on the note. If you've got, let's say, a flute melody, and the flute, you want that flute melody to sound really fluty, don't double it. Because doubling is going to, one, you're going to cancel out the nuances of their vibrato. You're going to cancel out the nuances of the texture, the way they shape their note, because they're going to fight that other player who's playing the same thing. But if, let's say, you need a melody that's high up in the woodwinds to stick out over a strong string harmonic bass, then yeah, you may need to double that flute, especially if it's in the lower range. So understanding doubling is really understanding how all the instruments relate to each other in terms of strength and timbre, and understanding when you want to really have a nuanced solo line versus when you need something to stick out and be more powerful. I am not fully to the point of my theory on orchestration, so to speak, is complete or very mature yet, and I'm working on terminology, and I am working on an orchestration course, by the way, which should be coming out in the next few months, and I think it's going to be very different from a lot of stuff that's out there. One of my favorite quotes was when I did take an orchestration class with Robert Drassen, his old film composer, passed away about a year or two ago, and he had the best quote. Everybody in the class was doubling up their melodies because they think that, oh, this is orchestration. I need to come up with an interesting timbre and an interesting doubling. And he kept telling everybody, don't double. It just makes your line less distinct and it takes away that unique timbre. And then he finally slammed his hand down and he said, doubling is for cowards. So I loved it. But it's kind of true. You feel like you have to double things because that's what people do in orchestration. Well, the reality is, if you really want something to shine, give it to a solo player. You hear this a lot in Mahler. Mahler will just give the line to one player, a single oboe, or often what's really striking is a single solo violin, and you'll be shocked how loud it is compared to the rest of the orchestra. It really sticks out. So yeah, that's just something to think about with doubling. Let's see. Good. David says the streaming concept is very helpful for analysis. I think it's going to turn out to be very fruitful, thinking about auditory streams and auditory scene analysis. And I've got a whole lot of new terminology I'm going to be trying to introduce into the vocabulary. I think will be very useful for everybody as a composers. Let's see. Wong asks, what if we emphasize more about the melody instead of harmony? I'm not quite sure exactly what you're asking here, if this is in relation to orchestration or just sketching. So maybe you can clarify that question a little bit later. Daniel said here, somebody linked to the Joseph Wagner book, The Practical Orchestration. That's a great book to read through, a lot of useful models to work from. Effectively, what Joseph Wagner did in the book was to take piano textures, right? So he may do something like, and ask, how would I orchestrate that with the strings or over the entire orchestra? So it's a really great way to really get some basic chops down. Let's see. I've been reading several books. Wong asks, the notation software I used is Sibelius. So I still use Sibelius. I do own Dorico, and I've used MuseScore in the past and a little bit of Finale. I'm still mostly on Sibelius. There's some features in Dorico that I feel I want to be there first before I fully dive deep into it. But I have a feeling I'll eventually be switching to Dorico full time. Let's see. Yeah, this stream is, if anybody's asking, this stream will be permanent on YouTube. I'm going to try to keep these up from now on. It's a little bit of a different dynamic than symposiums normally, and I may have live streams once a week and then, another symposium where we can chat for Art of Composing members only, something like that. But we'll see. I haven't fully decided. So, yeah, are there other questions that that other people want me to ask, or sorry, answer. Let me go back, see if I miss anything here. I did see somebody saying that there's a little bit of a delay between typing the chatting and when it actually shows up compared to when I answered on the stream. I think this is just the nature of streaming. It's kind of like a live TV show somewhat. And yeah, this is the internet. It's laggy. It is currently optimized for most interactions. So I think it's about as fast as it can be. But yeah, go ahead, ask some more questions. And yeah. So in the meantime, just so everybody gets a little bit of perspective on who I am and what I'm doing, my name's John Branningham. I started Art of Composing about 5 years ago now, I guess, 2000. Oh, it was 6 years ago, 2011. It was August 2011. And ever since then, I've just been writing about music. I've been thinking a lot about composition, how it all works. And I've got a few very in-depth courses on composition. So my Music Composition 101 really gives everybody a full foundation for being able to compose, short classical pieces that have a lot of technique and skill behind them. They're not just grabbing at things and composing by the seat of your pants. It's a mixture of understanding the theory, understanding the underlying structure of music, and then also being able to step back and just go with what feels right in the moment. And then my Music Composition 201 is about really developing pieces and writing things that are longer. We look at sonata form in depth, and sonata form is just a vehicle for you understanding how to develop your music and how to control how your music relates to time, temporality, what makes your music feel like a beginning, a middle, or an end. So let's see. Somebody asked, where did that go? Charles asked, what kind of coffee do I drink? I am drinking out of my Harry Potter Ministry of Magic mug that I got at Universal Studios. Groundwork coffee. Groundwork is the brand. It's really good. And I drink bulletproof coffee, right? So Google it if you haven't heard about it. I blend butter and MCT oil. I know that sounds crazy to a lot of people who've never tried it. I've been doing it for years now, and it's actually quite delicious. So do I have any advanced courses for experienced composers and musicians? Well, that depends on the concept of advanced. Like I said, I'm working on my orchestration course, which is, it's going to be for somebody who understands at least the concepts of Music Composition 101. But what I've found with a lot of composers is there is usually a lot of gaps in knowledge. And you may be advanced. However, there's often things that you don't know, that you don't know that you don't know. New ideas about how music actually works. The theory that I use in the courses is a lot of new theory. It's not necessarily, I'm not necessarily pulling up a book from 200 years ago, although sometimes I do pull from that too. But it's a lot of stuff that if you're not in the books that are being written right now and the dissertations being written right now, you may not know some of these ideas. A lot of the newest ideas that I have, I share in the symposiums because that's the quickest way for me to get it out. Let's see. Now, Anil's asking about inspiration for composition. So inspiration is one of these subjects that it's a fuzzy term, and you can think of inspiration as the desire to compose. And Juan wrote, I missed your question. I'll go back and try to get it after this. Inspiration is either, you can look at it as the desire to compose or an idea that comes into your head. And I wouldn't put too much weight on inspiration. Inspiration is one of these things that I feel like you have to be ready for it. You need to put in the time now, because it's one thing getting this strong desire and this idea of what your piece is supposed to be. Maybe you get the inspiration for a symphony, right? Symphony is a long piece of music, and there's a lot of notes involved. And that inspiration usually gets wiped away after about the first 3 bars. And after that, you're just left with a lot of work. So the ability to work quickly, personally, I believe, is much more important than the ability to capture inspiration. However, if you have the ability to work quickly, when inspiration strikes, you're able to jump on it, right? So when I get an idea, I'm like, wow, I really feel strongly about this melody that I can hear in my head. Or maybe I'm improvising and that inspires me. Or maybe I'm listening to something or reading a book and that inspires me. I can run to the piano, or I can grab a pad of paper, and I can generally write down something that approximates that idea really quickly, to where the inspiration is captured, and now I've got stuff to hold on to when I sit down to do the work. A composer like Ravel, for instance, I was reading about his process of composition and sketching. And yeah, often he will feel like he doesn't have an idea for something. But more often than not, it's just him writing down stuff and then reworking it. And he was known to be a continuous improver of his pieces, would even after they were published, would rewrite sections, rewrite orchestrations. And, it's composition is like an iceberg. The tip of the iceberg, that's your inspiration. That's the thing that pokes out in your brain. It's like, oh, wow. The actual work and the actual composition is everything that's under the water that you don't see. And that's the domain of the composer. That's where you get your hands dirty and you really work out your ideas. And don't feel like what you write is set in stone. Cross stuff out, change it. But this is the most important thing. Write it down first. Get to the point where you have an idea, you write it down, and if you don't like it, just scrap it. Just ignore it. Don't worry about it. If it's on the page and you don't like it, just give it a big X like that. And then what you'll find is the next day you'll come back, you're like, hey, actually, I think there is something to that, but I just need to tweak this one note, and then you rewrite it underneath, and you've got the perfect idea that you were actually after. But it's this effort that you put in. It's the work that you put in. There's this concept in memory called memory consolidation, where when you learn something, you learn it, right? It's in your short-term memory, but it's not in your long-term memory yet. And when you go to sleep, your memory, right, the thing that you learn will bounce around your brain, so to speak, and make interconnections, and you'll learn your own music better. And when you come back, that's often when you actually have the inspiration. It's not the initial moment. It's usually the next day, 2 days later, 5 days later, after working on it for 2 weeks. Then when you're going through, you're like, I got it. This is what needs to happen at this point. These notes need to change. This chord needs to be different here. And that's where the magic happens. And if you don't believe me, take a look at the sketches that have been published for Beethoven Symphony No. 10. You'll look at it, you'll be like, this is embarrassing. This isn't the Beethoven that I know and love. This is a hack going like... It looks like that when you read it. You're like, what is this stuff? And that's because Beethoven wasn't about the initial moment of inspiration, even though that's this image that we get of Beethoven. We get this image of the crazy composer up in his, he's up there going like, da, and that's the thing that comes out. But in reality, it's Beethoven walking around, getting an idea, going back, working it, scratching it out, doing something different. Even Mozart did the same. Mozart sketch. There are sketches that you can see of Mozart. So don't believe the lies. Everybody does it. Everybody has to get their ideas down, work through their ideas, and get to the point where they know their piece well enough to where they can make the educated choices. Okay, let me jump back. Let's see. Oh, okay. So, Juan, I see your question. Masking frequencies. So let me just jump back to auditory streams for a second. I can't go into this in too much depth because I don't have all the capabilities and all the things to play. But effectively, when your brain hears something, it's got a frequency. It's got a spectrum of frequencies that are what you're hearing, right? So if you hear a flute playing, you hear mostly the fundamental note, that, right? Or this is a piano, for instance. But also above that are all these harmonics that are being excited. Now, there are experiments with how certain frequency spectrums will cover up or sound like they complete other frequency spectrums. And And what you've got is this masking of harmonics by, effectively noise, like white noise can mask. Just like if you're in your room and you turn on a fan at night to sleep, what that's doing is it's getting your ears used to that frequency, right? The noise spectrum, and noise is basically, it's usually like white noise is equal equal amplitude at all frequencies, I think, and you get this kind of sound. That is masking other things that are happening. So you may not hear, when that's going on, the creaking of a door opening in your room, somebody got up to go to the bathroom and come back or something like that. So that's kind of the concept of masking. So let me see. Can you talk about chord progressions in the arrangement? New ideas about how to set chord progressions that can lead to one another and techniques of doing this. Yeah, Jimmy, I talked a little bit about this earlier. So if you want, you can take a look. I pulled up my chord chart, and yeah, actually, it's just the concept of functional harmony, how one chord leads to another, and how that feels like there's a syntax, a beginning and a middle and an end, or a logical way of one chord moving to another. So I recommend moving back or checking out my articles on diatonic harmony and signing up for my free course. Uh-oh, I hear my son. Sounds like somebody got hurt. Let's see, where have you learned the most about arrangement, whether it be from certain composers or maybe some suggested literature? Yeah, so for arrangement, once again, its terminology can be kind of confusing. So there are specific definitions of arrangers versus orchestrators, like in Hollywood, right? An orchestrator often will get a sketch by a composer and have to turn that sketch into a full score. If it's somebody like John Williams, that sketch may be very in depth, right? Something like this. Or that sketch could be something like this, and then the orchestrator has a much tougher job to do. Whereas arranging is usually taking a piece and doing the full orchestration, figuring out the structure of the piece. Maybe you get a lead sheet, you get a melody, AABA or ABAC or something, and you've got to turn that into something that's 5 minutes long. I think the best thing that you can do for understanding arranging and controlling pacing is listen to a lot of music and ask questions. Ask intelligent questions about that music. There are some good books on it, obviously, but I like to think of starting big and going small. So I was a helicopter pilot in the Army. I was a scout pilot, and one of the ways that we would do reconnaissance and we'd try to explain what we're looking at to people is we would start big and then we would move small. So, for instance, if you're listening to a piece, right, and you like the way it's arranged, ask yourself, well, what are the big sections here? Where, there's clearly one feel here at the beginning where they go through the entire, A, B, A, C structure, right? And then maybe there's a different feel where they go through A, B, A, C again, but it's softer, smaller, right? So maybe it's big and it's small. And then maybe there's a B section that's in between the two. It doesn't feel quite as big. And then there's another section at the end, there's a bridge that's smaller. And then there's another section at the end where they play everything and it's bigger than the first one. So now you've got almost like a little arrangement map, something like this. Sorry, I'm writing something down so I can show you. So where, the first one is 1, and then 2, it gets small, 3, it gets a little bit bigger, 4 gets a little bit bigger, right? That seems like, that's not all that useful, but if you map that against the actual form of the piece, A, B, A, C, right? Or this is the head all the way through the piece, and then you play it again here, you got a little bridge section here, and you play it one more time all the way through, then you can start to say, okay, well, how do I make it bigger, right? So at a basic level, more instruments equals more bigger, right? And I know that's bad grammar. More instruments means that your piece is going to have more harmonic saturation. If you give them a louder dynamic, obviously it'll be louder. You can still have a lot of people playing very, very quietly, and it'll still feel small. So dynamics are critical. You can say, I'm probably going to have more loud dynamics in that section. timbres are important at that point. You're going to have people playing in certain registers because let's say a flute down here is going to be quieter than a flute up here or up there. It's going to be more piercing. So the way you spread out your instruments is going to change if you want it big or small. So I would say that's the best way to start thinking about it, is just think about the big picture first and how you want to control all of that, and then slowly work your way down to the smaller scale. So one of the coolest techniques that I learned about arranging is to write your piece in the simplest way, right? Maybe a melody in chords, or a melody and a left hand accompaniment, bass line, whatever. And then start to write out what you want. So maybe you want strings high up, right? It doesn't matter what terms you use as long as the terms work for you. So for this section, I want my strings high up, right? And that means I'm going to have the strings playing just like this. Now, what I've got as a pianistic, that's a very pianistic style of thing, right? If I was playing it just with the strings, it may be something like this, right? I probably should switch to a string instrument, but it's kind of a hassle. So you've got this up in the high strings, and then maybe the violins go, right? I just wrote that out in words, so I don't need to figure out what the notes are. I don't need to figure out the textures or anything like that. But then maybe a little bit later on, strings low, and then maybe horn melody, right? And now I've written that. Let's see. Strings low, horn melody. And I know at that point in the score, I need to transition to that, right? I don't know how I'm going to do that. And often what I'll do is I don't know, I'll maybe not be too nuanced about the orchestration where it leads in, and I'll just start orchestrating from that part, and I'll orchestrate a little bit at the beginning. It's jumping around, moving back and forth on your piece, but just thinking about it in terms of words, in terms of feelings, in terms of textures, visual textures, auditory streams, stream textures, stream geology actually is what I'm thinking a lot about, which is fascinating how stream geology connects with music streams. But that's just a weird thing I'm looking at. Orchestrating with words first, arranging with word first, and then moving into the musical aspect of the actual notes that you write is a good way to get through a lot of material quickly. There is a podcast that I did where I orchestrate, and I called it My Principles of Orchestration. I think it's episode number 9. I highly recommend listening to that because I have an example of this, and I orchestrate the piece in the episode, and then I show you all the different steps of it. So go to the podcast, go to the webpage and check it out. Tim, I see you there. Thanks. Let's see. Okay. Let me see if there's any other questions here. How much scope does electric instruments like synthesizers have in orchestrations? Well, okay, so I would say synthesizers, they have a place today. They're everywhere. I personally feel there's some blend issues between the unrealistic sound, or not, I would say not unrealistic, but the less organic sound of synthesizers versus the more organic sound of traditional instruments. The way traditional instruments vibrate and resonate with each other, against each other in the room, usually feels slightly different, and there can be blending issues. But if you want that specific sound, that's fine. And in fact, we've been doing it for years. Let me pull up Star Wars. Let's see, Episode 5, Empire Strikes Back. Hold on, let me find the album. Here we go. This is from the scene where Yoda lifts up the X-wing out of the swamp. Let me say here, listen for the synthesizer. There's like a wow, right? Like it does like a phase shift on something. I'll try to like give it a cue. Okay, so if you heard that part, that was some kind of synthesizer, and they're doing some kind of flange or phaser on there, like wow, whereas moving around it's got some modulation on it. It doesn't blend in the sense of like the strings are kind of quietly blending with the flutes, and you got the chillesse, and it sticks out. But that's what he wanted in that situation. He wanted that sound to be kind of futuristic, right? So there's examples of synthesizers being used with orchestra all over the place. You just gotta go around and look for them. There's some early stuff that's really cool to listen to with like the Andes Martineau and some other old synthesizers from the turn of the century. These kind of like Hammond organ type things. I can't think of like any of the specific pieces that come to mind right now, but just Google around, listen to, examples of synthesizers from the turn of the century, early 20th century music. And you hear some great composers that are using them, like, what's the guy's name? Can't think of the guy's name right now. I listened to it the other day and I'm just totally having a brain fart. So don't know what it is. So yeah. If that is pretty much all the questions, I hope I got to everybody's questions. If I missed your question, I apologize. Please show up next week. But we're coming up to an hour and a half, and yeah, I think this has been a good one. Let me know if you like this, if this works for you. I think it's going to be a little bit cleaner than the other symposiums. We've had some issues with Google Hangouts and trying to have people connect and stuff. This way, there's no connection on your part. It's just you just show up and watch. So yeah, Christian, yeah, you said you never really heard that as a synthesizer, and I'm not sure what's going on in the actual film at that moment to where if it gets covered by some other sound effect or if it blends in with some other sound effect, and that's why he used it. But either way, listen for it. It's out there. Obviously, in modern film scoring, synthesizers are used all the time. Right? I use them all the time. Other composers use them all the time. You can blend them really well if you know how to mix your stuff. Charles asked, how was my grandmother's birthday? It was great. Actually, we had a blast. I did Name That Tune, which I think was a lot of fun. I got up in front of everybody. And there was like 50 or 60 people there, so it was kind of a big deal. My grandma turned 80 last week. But yeah, it was a really good birthday. And thanks for asking. Yeah, Stockhausen used synthesizers. A lot of great composers use synthesizers. So I would say sky's the limit. I personally am a traditionalist. I like, early 20th century romantic. Mahler's my man. Ravel's my man. John Williams is my man. That's the kind of music that I like. So I don't do that as much. I don't listen to a lot of Stockhausen. However, I'm not bagging on anybody. Everybody has music inside of them. Everybody has something to say. I like to think of it as, when we're composing, we're setting up musical questions, right? We're thinking about music. We're thinking about life, and how you answer those questions is particular and unique to you. And I think everybody owes it to the world. If you feel like you've got the music inside you and you've got answers inside you, to learn this stuff and start coming up with your own answers. Start creating music for people, putting it out there. So let's see. Isn't arranging like turning a music sheet into different instruments? You decide what notes or what instruments play what notes. Yeah, I mean, you're arranging. Arranging could mean a lot of different things. You're arranging the structure of your piece. You're orchestrating it out for different instruments. David, let me see if I can get to your questions real quick. Let's go back here. Question topic: role of inversion in context of melody, or as a contrasting idea, or even a basis for movement in a large-scale piece. Well, inversion is critical for harmonic movement in your piece. If you're writing with block chords, right? You can still think about inversion. This is a C, in root position. And for anybody who's not familiar with inversions, you're basically changing what the bass note is. That's a first inversion C chord, and I didn't double. I guess I doubled in the sense of I'm playing octaves in the bass to make that strong. But up here in the other harmonies, that's a first inversion. It's got a very different feel than this. This feels very stable, very solid. This feels like it wants to go somewhere, and it's here. Right? That's kind of the most logical spot for it. This, obviously, we use this a lot. That's a second inversion with the G in the bass. Cadential 6/4, right? So that inversion is critical. And in fact, if you want to make your bass line interesting, I could do this. Right? That's a pretty boring progression. But now if I start to add inversions, what I did, my bass now becomes a little bit more like a melody. I'm thinking melodically with my bass line. And that's the strength of inversions, is that you get that tendency not just of the harmonic motion, but you get the tendency that comes along with melody. These notes want to move towards another note by step or half step or so on. So yeah, inversions are critical for any composer, understanding how they work. Okay, let's see. Yeah, Daniel said arranging is like taking a melody and expounding upon it. Yeah, I mean, you can take anything. You take a melody, you take a chord progression, you add a little bit to it, but there's a difference kind of mentally for me between composing and arranging it. However, you do all of them all the time, and they mix back and forth. And oh, you meant inversion as in retrograde. Sorry. Okay. Well, that is not, I would say, retrograde and inversion in terms of like melodic like things it's an important skill to be able to do. You could think of it in the sense of like sets, right? Musical set theory, where if you invert something, if you got this, if you invert that around the C, you actually get, right, steps going down. Whereas if I was to invert that melody within diatonic harmony, becomes something like that. Now, inverting, doing retrograde with diatonic harmony, a lot of people get confused about this. Keep your notes connected to the underlying harmony. Don't feel like, oh, if I invert this, I have to do that. You know, I could do to keep it so that it feels like it's still working with the harmony. That's fine. And once again, who's going to know any different? You know, if you mentally invert it and then you change it, it doesn't matter. You don't have to stick to, oh, well, this isn't an exact inversion, so it's not authentic anymore. That's a load of garbage. Do whatever feels right and whatever sounds right after you've written it down. Write it down, though. When you get an idea, we work it out for a second, and then we write it down, and then we move on to the next bar. We don't do 8 bars of improvising and working on an idea and then try to go back and remember it all. If you try to do that, you're never gonna make any pieces, you know, longer than a minute or so, because you're just gonna be like, I can't ever do this. Composing is too difficult. Have I written music for iwi? Believe it or not, I have used iwi to compose. Hold on, give me 1 second. This here is my own personal iwi USB. Now, what's cool about the iwi, I'm a wind player, right? I play trumpet, I play saxophone, and a little bit of clarinet. So this feels natural. I'm not plugged in right now, so you won't hear me playing. All right. However, the one issue that I find with this, and I know there's ways to modify it, I just haven't done it, is that the pressure blowing on this iwi, and I don't know if this is different for the iwi 5000 or I know Yamaha's got some other ones, but it feels very different. It's more, I think, closer to an oboe. so it's kind of tiring on my lungs. So I end up not playing it all that much. I probably just need to practice with it, and then I would have something that's much more useful. But so yeah, I have written a little bit with my iwi. I wouldn't say I've written for iwi in the sense of like I haven't written a piece that's performed solely on iwi. Maybe I will. That kind of sounds fun. Let's see. I sometimes see fast like 1/16 ladders, like C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. Oh, what chord do they belong to? Well, okay, so you can make a lot of stuff fit within the same chord. If I go and Juan, yes, there is time for one more question. Right? Chippy's asking, what does that relate to? Well, obviously that's a C scale, so you could say it's C major, right? And you'll see often, like writing fast, you just get a lot of notes in there, right? When you get a lot of notes, often you'll get notes that sound like they're not going to work, but if you move past it really quickly and it's not falling on like an important structural beat, like beat 1, right? That's going to sound kind of weird, but nothing sounded weird there with the F. But that can also work with this harmony. Or this one. Or this one. Right? It doesn't really necessarily matter. I mean, you can write a lot of notes over a lot of different chords, and I can even do it weird. A lot of it has to do with context. Where is it coming from and where is it going? If I go... it still feels okay because I resolved it at the end to that C chord. So, so yeah, writing fast. Just try to think about what is the underlying harmony again, and what scale can you use with that. And you know, if you've got an underlying harmony like this, a C7 chord, yeah, you can use this scale, right? Which would be the F major, or it would be C mixolydian. But as I showed you real early in the symposium, right, I can do a polychord. I put an F sharp major chord, which gives it still a dominant sound, but that also means I can go, or sorry, I can use a whole tone scale with it. And you'll hear that a lot if you watch cartoons, like kids' cartoons, and they're trying to like eat up some time with the music because the composer's like, I don't know what to do at this spot. I just need to eat up some time. You'll see. I just resolved it to F right there. So, yeah, Ilka, these will be automatically posted to this channel. I think it takes about 24 hours is what it said, but it may show up sooner. I don't know how YouTube's algorithm exactly works on this. So, we'll see. That's one of the reasons I'm doing this as opposed to doing it with the Hangout way, is because it was this automatically gets posted. So, okay, well, if there are any last questions, I guess I can take them right now. Otherwise, I will start to close this off. Now is your chance. Okay, well, nothing's coming in, although some people said there was like a 30-second delay, so we'll see. Thanks, everybody, for showing up. I would really appreciate if you went over to artofcomposing.com, take a look at what's there. Oh, wait, Juan's question. Where's Juan's question? Oh, can you explain how to write a bass line for a polyphonic piece that doesn't have a specific form? Okay, so I'm not quite sure. Writing bass lines, I'm not sure exactly the concept of the piece that you're going after. I mean, if you're talking about like writing a fugue here, or canon, or counterpoint, or invention, a lot of it still comes down to understanding the underlying harmony, right? And let me go ahead and pull up Sibelius here again. Oh, that's not Sibelius. Here we go. So if let's say that I want to write a simple kind of two-part invention type thing. And apologies if I have some parallel octaves or fifths here. It's okay to write those, and it's okay to write them and then correct them later. And often it's okay to leave them in. I know that's a kind of a big no-no with a lot of people, but most of the time, unless it's like blatantly like parallel octaves all over the place, you don't normally pick them up. Now, if you're taking a counterpoint class and you get you lose points for if you lose points for having parallel octaves, obviously that's different. You do what your teacher tells you to do in that situation. But if you're actually just composing something, don't get too wrapped around the axle on things like parallels, because like I said, you can always come back and fix them. And one of the big things that Ravel liked to do is go back and fix voice leading issues with his pieces after the fact. So don't feel like you've got to get it perfect at the beginning. We're not all Bach. We don't spend all of our days writing inventions and teaching chorale to his 20 children and his multiple students. Sometimes we don't have the kind of practice that other composers had in very specific things. That's not to say you shouldn't make an effort to really master counterpoint, master voice leading, things like that. But don't let it be a wall stopping you from making forward progress. So at a very basic level, we can start to write, maybe we can start with a chord progression. Let's start with a chord progression first. And I'm going to keep it really simple, right? Maybe I do C, G, C, let's see, right? So what I've done here is, well, actually, I already started writing a little bit of a kind of a bass line with it. But what I'm really doing here is I'm just thinking about harmonies. Now, I realize that's very boring sounding, but I'm doing this one to show you that it's not necessarily going to be boring sounding once you fill out everything in the right way, but also it gives you a reference for what you're thinking about harmonically. So let's do this. So now what I like to do is something called chord tone melodies, and you can do it steps. You can do it matching the harmonic rhythm that you already have. Let's do steps right here. Okay, so very basic at this point. What I've done is I've created a little chord tone melody based off of a chord progression that I wrote. And this chord progression, there's no inversions in this yet. It's all root position chords, but it follows very, plain syntax, right? So let me put the Roman numerals, and I'll put the chords above for everyone else. This is a 1 chord. This is a 5 chord. One chord. 5 chord. Actually, 4, 5, 1. Now you're going to say, hey, wait, that's not necessarily syntactical because 5 shouldn't move to 4. And I've got some thoughts on this, which we'll get into in a moment, but it may not necessarily end up in this inversion, which would make it legal if you look at my chord chart. So now that we've got this, and also we could change it, right? We could add chords, we could subtract chords. Sometimes I make mistakes. Maybe I meant to do a perfectly functional chord progression and I didn't write it, but I just went with what felt right in the moment. That's fine too, okay? That's not to say that you shouldn't learn functional harmony and do things correctly. But now at this point, we can start to connect the chord tones. This is usually the next step that I have beginner composers do, is I have them go through and now decide, do they want to connect these? So I could do something like this. Right, so now I've created a little bit more shape to it. It's not so arpeggiated, not boom, bop, boom, bop, bop, that kind of stuff. But there's actual line here. And, maybe I do something like this. Okay. I don't really know how this is fully going to sound. Let's just listen. Yeah. Tonic, dominant, predominant, dominant, tonic. Yeah, that's correct right now. So like I said, not necessarily fully functional. However, if I make that a 4/6, you'll find that that actually is a legal chord progression because this takes the place of what would be considered I move from 5 back to 6, also known as a deceptive cadence. If you look on my chart, 5 can also go back to 4/6. That's the movement of the G moving to A that's legal. And if you're interested in why it's legal, I would recommend reading Dmitry Tomashko's book, A Geometry of Music, in which he actually did corpus studies of Bach and Mozart and looked at the percentage of likelihood that one chord will lead to the next. So that it's not some theorist coming from on high saying it shall be this. What he's looking at is the music that actually was written and how one chord would lead to the next, and looking at the percentage of, let's say 1 moving to 5, obviously a huge percentage of that, and that is something that Mozart or Bach would have done. Now this melody maybe is not the most nuanced, and we can make changes to it. It's probably not worth the effort right now. But now, why don't we go ahead and do this? I'm gonna actually, I won't. At this point, I really want to start adding in a counter melody, and this is I've got another video where I call this the Cheater's Guide to Counterpoint. This is kind of the same concept. Is that let's just get simple here first. Let's just write sixths and thirds underneath. And you can start with an octave if you want. And in this case, I think we'll start with let's just start with 6. Let's just keep it simple. So we know the underlying harmony is C, but we don't necessarily have to fill out the entire chord. C and E, that's a sixth, right? Now we've got E. We want to put a C there. We want to keep that. Now this is a 10th, but think of it as a third, right? It's a compound interval. An interval of a 10th it basically sounds the same as a third. It's called a compound interval. It's still C and E. Now we've got a G up here. So let's go ahead and change this to a B, right? And then we could put another B there because a D, we've got a sixth here. And then here we've got an E, so we can put a C. And then we've got a G. Why don't we put an E? We've got a B, so why don't we put a D? And then why don't we put a B there? This is not very super nuanced counterpoint here. This is basically saying what's the note in the melody and how can I make it sound good from the bass, from the perspective of the bass, and it's usually having a third or sixth of the bass. Now there may be some parallels in here that I haven't spotted yet, and I'm not too worried about that. Now here we've got a C, but we're on a 4 chord, so I'm going to put the A right there. And actually, taking away the F, we're probably going to lose the F-ness of the chord, right? It's probably going to feel a little bit more like an A minor chord until I do that, and now it's going to feel more like an F chord. And then here we've got G, but they're moving in contrary motion, right? So C goes down to G, F can go up to G, and then maybe I do that, or I could do that, and then we move to C here. Let's go ahead and see what this sounds like. Okay. It works to me. I mean, if somebody presented me with that, I'd say, yeah, you've done a good job. Now I can go back through and I can look at, are there parallels? Are there weird harmonic movements? Are there, is there anything that I should be concerned about as a composer? And you can go, make those corrections. But at the basic level, we've just created a melody and a counter melody in a step-by-step, very simple fashion that I believe anybody can do. I mean, I didn't stretch my brain all that much to be able to do this. I looked at this note and I wrote a 6 or a third underneath it. And it all works. Now, maybe we can find some parallels here, but for the most part, if you notice, there aren't parallels because it doesn't matter. Well, I should say it doesn't matter that if there's parallel motion, because you can move in parallel sixths and parallel thirds as much as you want. Now, you don't want to do it too much because it can get kind of boring. However, I'm mixing it up contrary and parallel motion, but I didn't have to think too hard about it because it's always a third or a sixth. So if you get a little parallel motion in there or whatever, it doesn't matter. After this, you can go through and say, like, I don't like that this bass line starts right here, like this. Maybe we change it like that so it's, or maybe you want to change up the harmony, something like that. So either way, that's how I conceive of writing my bass lines often, and my counter melodies is that way. So yeah. Somebody was asking here. Let's see. Composers that are using synths. Charles, the one I was thinking was Hindemith. Hindemith wrote quite a bit for some like early synthesizers. I think he did. Let's see. Let me synthesizer pieces. Just Google this. See what he came up with. Trautonium, that's what it was. I listened to a piece for Trautonium the other day. Let me see if I can find it. Hold on. Let's see. I don't know if it's in Apple Music. Let's see. Oh, here we go. You can hear this. It's a very expressive instrument. It's got a very natural sound. And I think it's got a... So yeah, look around for composers that have done that because they're out there, and I think that instrument in particular has a very human sound because it doesn't appear to have keys. It's got like a bar that you slide up and down. Let's see. Anil said studying the pastiche of classical music. You know what? I must say that sometimes I don't like the word pastiche because I think it denigrates composers who really do feel still traditional tonal music is the kind of music that they want to speak in their music. Not to say that anything's wrong with your teacher, but I hear it thrown around, and I think it's thrown around a lot because a lot of people who do pastiches don't fully understand the style. They only understand parts of the style, and it becomes inauthentic. And when you start to really understand the style of it, it leaves the realm of pastiche, and it becomes really you working through and understanding that style so that you can integrate it with your own style and eventually do something of your own later on down the road. So there's a famous phrase, imitate, assimilate, innovate. You can't do it in another order. You have to imitate and assimilate their ideas first. So if whatever composers you want to learn, you have to try at least a little bit to imitate their style. Otherwise, what you're doing is you're really just spinning your wheels trying to come up with something new that's never been done before, I guess. And what that means, if it hasn't been done before in some sense, it probably shouldn't be done. I think we need to acknowledge that music as a system is emergent. And often when there's these big muscle movements to try to force a new style, then it feels inauthentic. It feels unhuman. And, not to say that Milton Babbitt or Pierre Boulez are not great composers, but I think also it's it has a different feel than somebody like Ravel or Mahler that feels ultimately very human. And I personally, I've listened to a lot of, serial music, and just I still don't get the human connection to it. Sometimes I don't understand it. Sometimes I do understand it fully, and I still don't feel it. But I think there is a difference between if you look at early Schoenberg versus a lot of Milton Babbitt, where it's very mathematical in one sense, whereas you've got free atonality where they're using each note in an equal way, and they're not so concerned with trying to create a syntax harmonically. However, structurally, emotionally, it still feels very human. So, okay, well, I think that does it for me today. My voice feels like it's about to give out. So I hope you enjoyed the symposium. Like I said earlier, try to make it over to my website, check out my resources, read the blog, listen to the podcast, take the free course, and I'd love it if you signed up for Music Composition 101 or 201 or the full Academy monthly membership where you get access to both courses. And I am working on my orchestration course. It's coming along, probably still a few months in the working. Trust me, it's going to be worth it. You want me to spend this proper time on it, thinking about the issues. I don't want to just give everybody the same old orchestration course that, every book basically kind of says the same things often. There are some good books out there that are different. I would check out Creative Orchestration by George McKay, and the Joseph Wagner book, which is on archive.org, the Practical Orchestration, I think is what it was called. So yeah, until next time, I'll see everybody, and yeah, that's basically it. Talk to you later.